They said I'd talk too long, said my voice was too heavy, that it didn't match the tone they wanted for his service. So they hired a speechwriter. Picked out music I ain't never heard him listen to, and gave the microphone to folks who only showed up once the dying was almost done. But let me tell you something. I held his hand the night he died. Not them. Not the ones who stood up there reading poems off paper. Me. I was the one who wiped his forehead when the fevers came. I was the one who fed him broth when the chemo took away his appetite. I was the one who leaned in close when he could barely whisper, just so he could tell me, "Don't let them forget me." So no, I didn't need a mic. He didn't ask for one. He didn't pass away to the sound of speeches. He passed with my voice in his ear. The same voice that once said I do. At that funeral, I sat quiet. Folded my hands. Watched them turn our love into a slideshow. Big lights, fancy suits, matching ribbons, all for show. They didn't ask me to speak. They didn't want what I had to say. But here's the truth. They never could handle what I carry. Because what I had wasn't rehearsed. It was lived. See, the thing is, I didn't lose my voice that day. I just decided not to share it with people who wouldn't know what to do with it. I didn't lose my voice. I chose when to use it. And I saved it for this moment, right here. So if you're watching this and you've ever been told to sit down, if you've ever been left out of your own goodbye, you sit right there. Because I'm about to tell you the story they tried to skip over. Before I go any further, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from? Are you in your kitchen? Maybe sitting at the table with a cup of coffee that's gone cold? Or laying in bed, lights low, just trying to feel seen for once? Wherever you are, I'm glad you're here. See, I believe stories bring people together, even the ones we never thought we'd tell. So tell me this. What's the story you ain't never said out loud? What's the memory that still makes your chest feel tight? The thing you buried deep because nobody ever asked, or worse? Because the one person you wanted to hear it ain't here no more. Well, let me tell you, you don't have to carry that weight alone no more. If you got a story you've been holding close, send it to the email down in the description. Write it like you're talking to someone who's finally listening. And if it hurts to say it, that just means it matters. You know? Maybe you've been left out of your own life too. Maybe folks talked over you, pushed you to the side, made you feel like your chapter was over. Well, come sit with me. I'm just an old woman with a few more gray hairs than most and a heart that's been broken more times than I can count. But I got something the microphones don't always have: truth. So if you're tired of being silenced, tired of being the one who gave everything, but got forgotten when it mattered most, then pull your chair a little closer. Because I'm about to tell you what they did to me, and what I did right back. Now I know these days young people fall in and out of love quicker than you can scroll down a screen. But when we fell in love, it was different. It was quiet, it was steady, it was real. I met James when I was just 22 years old. He wasn't flashy, didn't drive no big car, but he had this calm about him, like he knew who he was and didn't need to prove it to nobody. We met at the church picnic. He asked if he could carry my plate. I told him I could carry it myself. He laughed and said, "I know you can. I just wanted to walk beside you." And that's what he did for the next 42 years. He walked beside me. Back then, love didn't come with phone screens or dating apps. It came with handwritten notes left on my porch. It came with porch swings that creaked under the weight of two tired bodies after a long day. We used to walk on Sundays. Didn't even matter where. Sometimes we didn't say a word. We just held hands and let the silence say what our mouths didn't need to. He wasn't a man of many words, but he never let go of my hand. Not when bills got tight. Not when the babies came one after the other. Not when his own daddy passed and he broke down right there on the back steps. Not in war. Not in worry. Not once. I remember one night the power went out during a storm. We lit candles and sat on the floor. I asked him, what if all we had was this? Just you, me, and this moment. And he said, then we'd still be rich. That was love. Not loud, not showy, but strong. Strong enough to hold two people through sickness and struggle. Strong enough to keep showing up when life tried to pull you apart. He didn't buy me diamonds, but he remembered every story I ever told him. He didn't take me on fancy trips, but he made me feel safe in every room we ever walked into. Now I ain't saying we were perfect. We had our storms too. But I always knew no matter how bad the day, he'd be there at the end of it. And that's why the funeral cut deep. Because the people who planned it, they talked about his job, his hobbies, his favorite football team. But they didn't talk about us. About how we built a life from scratch, with nothing but hope and a beat-up Bible. They gave him a goodbye that sounded like a stranger, but I knew the man. I loved the man. And I remembered what love looked like before it got dressed up for guests. It started small, just a little cough here and there. We thought it was just allergies, or maybe the weather changing. But then his hands started shaking, he dropped the remote, said his legs felt weak. And I remember the way he looked at me. Like he already knew something wasn't right. But he didn't want to scare me with it. We went to the doctor. They ran tests, more appointments. Then one day the doctor sat us down, didn't even look us in the eye for the first part. Just held a chart and said those words no wife ever wants to hear. It's cancer. Stage 3. Aggressive. Already moving. It felt like the whole room tilted, like I couldn't catch my breath. But James, he just reached over and grabbed my hand. Didn't say much. He never did. But his grip said everything. After that, our days got real different. He used to be strong, could lift anything, fix anything. But now I was lifting him. I bathed him, I changed his sheets, I fed him spoon by spoon, held the bowl close to his lips and whispered, "Just one more bite, baby, just one more." There were nights I didn't sleep at all. I'd sit in that hospital chair, holding his hand, watching the machines beep and blink, praying under my breath, telling God, if you're gonna take him, let it be gentle. But if you let him stay, please take this pain away. The kids? They came around at first. Brought flowers, took pictures. But as the months went on, the visits slowed. The calls got shorter. The silence got louder. I'd text them updates. They'd reply with hearts and emojis. But they never saw the nights where he cried because his body was giving up on him. They never saw me mop the floor after he was too sick to make it to the bathroom. Never saw the way I kissed his forehead after he forgot who I was for a whole hour. It was just me. And God. And that slow ticking clock. You learn who matters when death walks in. Not who sends flowers. Not who posts a prayer hand emoji on Facebook. But who stays. Who kneels beside you when the breath is shallow and the light's getting low. And I stayed. Because I made a promise at that altar. In sickness and in health. And I meant every word. It was about a week after James passed. House still smelled like flowers that had started to fade. His slippers were still by the bed. I hadn't moved them. Felt wrong. I was sitting at the table with my tea, lukewarm again. When Leah, my granddaughter, walked in, she had that look on her face. Like she was carrying something she didn't want to say, but knew she had to. I asked her what was wrong. And she sat down across from me, held my hand real soft, and said, "Grandma, they had the funeral meeting last night." I blinked. "What meeting?" I asked. She looked down, said they met at Carla's house, Dwayne's wife. They ordered food, picked colors, made programs, said they hired a young pastor with a good energy to lead it. And just like that, I realized. They planned his funeral. Without me. No phone call. No knock on the door. No mama. What do you think he would have wanted? Not even a seat at the table. Leah looked up at me and whispered, "They said they wanted to keep it modern. They were worried you might talk too long." Talk too long? I was the one who held his hand through every doctor visit, the one who cleaned his blood off the bathroom tiles, the one who heard his last breath. But they thought I might talk too long. It was like they took a knife and carved me right out of my own goodbye. I didn't argue. Didn't cry. Not in front of Leah. I just nodded. Got up, walked into my bedroom, and circled the date on my little calendar. The one James gave me last Christmas with all the family pictures printed on it. Then I picked out my dress. The one I wore to our 30th anniversary dinner. Still fit, still soft, still smelled like lavender. I laid it on the bed, pressed it smooth with my hands, and I told myself, you don't need a microphone to be part of his story. You were the whole book. Now let me tell you about Leah. She ain't the loud one. She don't talk over folks. She don't dress flashy or try to run a room. But that girl, she sees everything, always has. Leah's my youngest granddaughter, quiet as a feather fallen on a porch step, but strong too. Got that old soul in her, like she was born remembering things she never lived through. She was the only one who stayed behind after they all walked out of the house. Didn't say much, just sat with me. Made me tea. Rubbed my shoulders. Looked me in the eyes like I still mattered. That means something when the rest of the world starts treating you like furniture. One afternoon, I was sitting on the porch just watching the wind play in the trees. Didn't have much to say. Still carrying the weight of being cut out. Leah came out with her little laptop tucked under her arm. Said, "Grandma, I made something for you." I didn't know what she meant. She handed me a piece of paper, folded neat, warm from the printer. It was a speech. A eulogy. My eulogy. Not the one they hired somebody to write. Not the one filled with church buzzwords and things that sounded pretty but meant nothing. This one was full of memories. Real ones. Leah had taken everything I ever told her about James. The time he built me a garden even though his back was hurt. The way he used to hum gospel songs when he was nervous. The quiet way he cried when our second child was born. She put all of that into words. Typed them out like poetry. And at the bottom in her little handwriting she wrote, "You may not have a mic, Grandma, but you still have a voice." I held that paper in my hand for a long time. Didn't cry at first. Just sat there, letting it sink in. Then I looked at her and said, "Why'd you do this, baby?" And Leah said something I'll never forget. She looked at me, steady, and said, "I didn't want them to remember him without remembering you." Phew. That hit deep. Because that's what I was afraid of all along. Not just being left out, being erased. I didn't fight for the mic. I wasn't trying to take over no funeral. I wasn't looking to perform. I just wanted to be remembered. And Leah, she made sure I was. The night before the funeral was still. Not quiet, not peaceful. Just still. Like the house was holding its breath. I didn't sleep much, didn't even try. I got up around midnight, walked into the closet and pulled out that soft blue dress. The one James liked, the one he used to say made me look heaven ready. Hadn't worn it in years, but it still fit. I laid it out on the bed, ran my hands over the fabric like it was made of memories. Then I plugged in the iron, and just stood there watching the steam rise like prayers. Took my time, pressed every wrinkle with care, folded it over the chair like it was glass. Then I walked over to his side of the bed. His nightstand still had the same things. His old glasses, his pen, that tiny little notepad he used to scribble on during church. But what caught my eye was his Bible, the same one he'd had since before we got married. The pages all bent. Notes in the margins. His bookmark still stuck in Psalm 23. I picked it up and laid it on the dresser, right next to my earrings. It didn't feel right to walk into that church without him close by. And then, I stood in front of the mirror, held the paper Leah printed, cleared my throat, and tried to speak, just a few lines. Just enough to say goodbye the way I remembered him. Not the way they rehearsed it, but my voice shook, not because I was nervous, but because I knew I wasn't practicing to perform. I was practicing not to fall apart. Every time I said his name, it felt like it echoed in a room that had grown too empty. I looked at myself in that mirror, at my gray hair, my tired eyes, my shaking hands, and I whispered, "You got this. One last time, you stand for him. Even if nobody lets you speak with your presence." And I said a little prayer. Lord, don't let me break tomorrow. Not in front of them. Not in front of the ones who forgot what we built. I folded the speech, tucked it into my purse, laid down beside the empty space in that bed, and waited for the sun to rise. When I walked into that church, I knew right away this wasn't going to be about him. There were cameras, big ones, set up at angles like they were filming a TV show. Lights everywhere. People directing. Folks were to sit, like it was a concert, not a goodbye. The ushers had on matching gloves. The choir had coordinated robes with sparkles on the sleeves. Somebody had even printed programs with glossy covers and color photos. Photos they pulled off his Facebook page, most of them from years ago. Not one from the hospital. Not one of me holding his hand. I sat on the second row, right behind the big flower arrangement. The one I didn't pick. The one they chose, 'cause it matched the theme. They had a slideshow playing on the screen. Music in the background, soft and slow. It looked nice, I guess. But it didn't feel like him. There was a picture of him grilling at a cookout we didn't even go to together. Another one of him in a suit that I'd never seen. And a picture with Carla's family, like they was trying to make him part of something he never asked to join. And then the speaking started. Person after person got up, told stories that sounded good on the surface, sweet, polished, well-rehearsed. But I sat there thinking, he wouldn't recognize a single word of this. They talked about his adventurous spirit. James was not adventurous. That man ordered the same thing from the same diner for 20 years. They said he was full of laughter. Now yes, he smiled, but he wasn't loud. He was soft, gentle. He showed his love in silence, in showing up, in fixing things without saying a word. They said he loved jazz. James hated jazz. He was gospel and old Motown, nothing else. But they didn't ask me. They didn't check. They gave him words he wouldn't recognize, stories he would nod along to, music he wouldn't hum. It felt like a play, like I was watching strangers perform a part they didn't live. Like they were trying to turn him into a highlight reel instead of a husband, a father, a man who just showed up every day and did his best. And I wanted to stand up, wanted to say stop. This ain't it, this ain't him. But I didn't. I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, speech still tucked in my purse, heart beating slow. Because I realized they were saying goodbye to the man they made up. But I was sitting there, missing the man I actually knew. While everybody else was clapping for the slideshow, wiping tears for a version of James they barely knew, I just sat still, still as a stone. Still as the nights I spent by his hospital bed, still as the breath that left his chest while my hand was wrapped in his. They passed the mic one more time, gave it to a cousin who hadn't visited him in over 10 years. He cracked jokes, talked about how James never let nothing bother him. And I thought, that man never saw James cry. Never saw him reach out for my hand when his bones started breaking from the inside out. Never saw him shake while trying to stand up and use the bathroom alone. They wrapped the whole service in soft music and nice words. They were ready to move on. But I wasn't. So when it was all said and done, when the last amen was spoken and the music faded, I stood up. Didn't ask nobody. Didn't wait for permission. I walked right up to that casket, slow, steady, just like I'd walked beside him all those years, and I leaned down, put my hand on his chest, closed my eyes. They turned the mic off, but I turned my soul on, and I whispered. I said, James, you were more than their script, more than their slideshow. More than their program with your face on the cover. I said, you were my every Tuesday morning, my porch swing partner, the reason I kept going when I didn't want to. You were my fight and my peace, my yes, my no, my always. I told him, they dressed you up for show, baby, but I remember the man in pajama pants and socks that never matched, the one who hummed gospel while making coffee, the one who held me when my mama passed and didn't say nothing, just let me cry on his chest. My voice cracked a little, but I kept going. I said they said I wasn't modern enough to speak, but I was the one who knew what silence sounded like when you were in pain. And then I laid my hand on that casket, real gentle, and I whispered, you ain't going in that ground alone, James. I put every memory we got in your coat pocket. And every part of me that ever loved you, it's walking with you. Then I kissed my fingers and touched the lid one last time. Nobody clapped, nobody even breathed. Because for a moment, they knew. They knew they just witnessed the real goodbye, the one they never heard. After the service, they invited everyone to the fellowship hall behind the church. They called it the celebration of life. Said it like it was a party. Said it like we didn't just bury the man who was my whole world. There were balloons. Catering trays lined up like a wedding reception. A photo booth with cardboard signs that said forever in our hearts. I stood near the back for a minute. Watched everyone pile in, laughing, toasting. Some of them I hadn't seen since our wedding day. People were taking pictures in front of a framed poster of James, big ol' smile on it from a vacation we never even took together. Something Carla had edited on her computer for a cleaner aesthetic. I heard someone say, he would have loved this. And I had to stop myself from speaking out loud, because the man I knew, he would have hated all that. He didn't like big crowds, didn't like fuss, didn't like folks making a show out of grief. He was a quiet goodbye kind of man, just a soft hand squeeze and a nod. I looked at the tables. None of them had a seat with my name on it. There was one open chair in the corner, but it was wobbly. Like everything else that day, it felt temporary. Duane gave a toast, talked about legacy and family strength. Never once mentioned the woman who cleaned up after James when he couldn't stand. Never once looked my way. I stood there feeling like furniture they forgot to dust. Like I didn't belong in the very room I helped build. With years of sacrifice. With prayers spoken over soup. With hands that rocked the babies now scrolling their phones and asking what time dessert was being served. So I picked up my purse, slipped out the side door. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't wait for applause. Didn't need another plate of food I wasn't hungry for. I walked outside. The sky was cloudy. Air was thick, but quiet. And I just stood there. Because they celebrated like nothing was missing. But I carried the empty. Not just the empty seat at the table. The empty bed. The empty Sunday mornings. The empty space beside me in this world. And while they laughed over punch and chicken wings, I held that emptiness like it was something sacred. Because it was. It still is. When I got back home from that funeral, I didn't cry. Not right away. I just walked in the front door. Took off them tight shoes, hung up that blue dress that still smelled like lavender and old memories. And I changed into my soft house robe. The one with the little tear at the sleeve I keep mending but never toss. The one James always said made me look like home. I walked into the kitchen, boiled some water, dropped a tea bag in my favorite mug, the chipped one with the sunflower on it. Didn't turn on the TV. Didn't check my phone, didn't speak a word, just walked outside and sat on the porch. That same porch where me and James used to sit in the evenings, counting cars, listening to crickets, holding hands without saying a thing. I wrapped both hands around that warm mug. Listened to the wind rustling through the trees. Heard a bird call out in the distance, low and sweet. And in that moment, I remembered what peace sounds like. Not applause, not funeral music. Not fake words from people looking for attention, just silence. And breath, and the knowing that I did right by him. They had their celebration, they got their pictures, but I had presence. I had those hard nights, those quiet prayers, the tears I never needed an audience for. Because you see, grief don't need an audience, it needs space. Space to sit with the ache, to sip slow, to whisper goodbye again and again, until it stops hurting just enough to keep going. And that night, as the sky turned pink behind the trees, I said, I love you, James. And I'm still here. It was about 3 weeks later. The days had slowed down, the flowers they sent had wilted, the fridge was full of food I didn't ask for. I was reading my Bible on the porch when I heard a knock at the door. Didn't expect nobody, didn't want nobody. But I opened it anyway. It was Dwayne. My oldest, my first baby. The one who used to fall asleep on my chest, now standing there in silence with his hands in his pockets. He didn't bring flowers. Didn't have a speech prepared. He just stood there with red eyes and a mouth that couldn't quite figure out what to say. I let him stand. Didn't rush him, didn't rescue him from the moment. Finally, he said it. Low, like it almost hurt to let it out. Mama, I'm sorry. He looked down when he said it. Couldn't even hold my gaze. And I just stood there in that doorway. Not angry. Not bitter, just steady. I said, I love you, I always will. But I ain't letting you forget what you did. Because love don't mean pretending like it didn't happen. Love don't mean ignoring the pain. It means looking someone in the eye and saying the truth anyway. I didn't invite him in that day. Wasn't ready. But I let him stand there long enough to know he wasn't turned away. I closed the door slow with my head held high, and in that silence, for the first time in a long time, he heard me loud and clear. Let me tell you something, plain and clear. Don't let nobody tell you your memories are outdated. Don't let this new world fool you into thinking your story don't matter no more. See, we live in a time where people scroll past what they don't understand, where everything's fast, edited, and wrapped in music and filters. But what I got? It's real. I remember when folks sat on the porch and listened. Not just heard you, but really listened. Now, they tell folks like me, you too old, you too emotional, you might say too much. But I say this, don't let moderns steal your meaning. Your voice, no matter how shaky, still got weight. Your story, no matter how long ago it happened, still got power. You're not too old to speak, you're not too late to be heard, you're not too soft to be strong, you are still here. That means your voice still matters. I've lived through times when women like me were told to stay quiet. To serve, to smile, to let the men do the talking. But I'm here to say, you can love people deeply and still call out their wrong. You can raise a family, keep the peace, and still choose yourself when they forget who you are. And for those of you watching, if you've been pushed to the back, talked over, laughed at, or flat out ignored, you am not crazy. You am not bitter. You're just finally telling your truth. I lived through love, loss, disrespect, and silence. And guess what? I'm still standing. Still talking. Still telling the truth that made them uncomfortable. Because my memories ain't disposable. My grief ain't for entertainment. My love wasn't a performance. It was a life. So whatever story you carry, whatever pain you buried so deep it feels like a part of your bones, let it out. Say it out loud. Say it like I'm sitting right next to you nodding along saying, yes baby, that's happened. And it mattered. They had the playlist, the flowers, the slideshow. But I had the promise, the real life, the quiet years that didn't make it into no program. They stood on stage, but I stood beside his bed. I stood by his pain, by his struggle, by his truth. They had words, but I had time. I had service. I had love that don't need a microphone to echo. And before I go, let me say this to you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sitting through all of this with me, for not scrolling past, for not rushing me, for not asking me to move on. You made room for my story. And now, I want you to make room for yours. Drop your truth in the comments. Tell me what they tried to silence in you. What they told you was too old or too much. Let it out right here. Like this video if it held your heart. If it brought back a memory, if it made you feel seen, even just for a minute. And subscribe, not just for me, but for every story that's been sitting too long in the back room waiting to be told. 'Cause next time, I'll be telling what happened when they called me too weak to handle the will. And trust me, they forgot who they were dealing with.